When thinking about the presidency, as I talked about, the Roman Republic is the role model for the development of the American system of government and the American Constitution. And I'll just remind you of a couple of things that pertain to the Roman Republican precedent to our presidency. First off, Rome starts out on the very edge of Etruscan territory in central Italy. As such, Rome's first rulers are a series of Tarquins, Etruscan kings, who the first Brutus helps kick out of Rome. So the Romans have kicked out their kings, but instead of appointing a king of their own, what they do is they establish a new form of government known as the Republic. They didn't want kings in Rome. In fact, the law in Rome, which later Brutus and Cassius would fulfill on Caesar's body, was that there shall be no kings in Rome, and if you as a Roman citizen discover anyone trying to become a king, kill him now and prove it in court later that you were acting righteously, because you never can tell. Those sneaky king wannabes might take power while you're dithering around trying to figure out what justice would require. The Romans are very clear. No kings in Rome. Kill him now. Explain it later. And if you better be able to explain it later. The Romans deeply distrusted vanity and ego, and they did not want to have anyone entrusted with too much power. So, instead of having a single praeses or president, they had two consuls. And these consuls acted basically as co-presidents. Not as president and vice president, because there's a hierarchy there, but as co-presidents. In fact, the equality of the consuls was so precise that in wartime, they each commanded the army every other day. There was a time in the Second Punic War when Hannibal, the great Carthaginian general, was marching up and down in Italy. And one of the Roman generals wanted to close with Hannibal and fight him. And on his days, his army marched straight towards Hannibal at high speed. But the next day, the command was given to Fabius Cunctator, who realized that after a major defeat, the Romans were not prepared to meet Hannibal in open battle. So on his days, the Roman army marched away as quickly as possible. And back and forth they went. The Romans didn't trust anyone with too much power, because they understood something that Shakespeare later said very eloquently: absolute power corrupts absolutely. Total power corrupts totally. It's totally corrupting. You give a saint too much power, and their desire for it is going to turn them into something else. Witness the scene from The Lord of the Rings where Frodo offers the ring to the Lady Galadriel of the Golden Wood. And in place of a dark lord, you would have a queen, beautiful and terrible and fair. All will love me in despair. In other words, her good intentions would turn her dark and evil. And she knew it. So the Romans deal with temptation that power offers by never giving anyone too much power. The only people that they gave power to were the dictators. And I talked to you about King Cincinnatus. But why have dictators in the first place? Because in times of national emergency, you need a leader. We've talked about this again and again. There needs to be somebody to take command in a battle. Otherwise, it's a mob, rout, anarchy mess that's not going to serve anyone's purpose. So, during times of crisis, the Senate could appoint a dictator. The dictator had very finite limits on their power. Oh, they could do anything while they were dictator. They could decide that men must wear purple hats and call each other Susan every Thursday while they were in power. A dictator had limitless power while they were in power, but they were empowered for a maximum of 6 months, but preferably for the duration of the crisis. And after they left power, they could be sued by anyone for violating Rome's basic constitution and freedoms. In other words, unless calling each other Susan and wearing purple hats every Thursday is somehow going to save Rome from whatever crisis they face, they're going to get sued and they're going to be found guilty. So there is a total power given for a limited period of time. Now, this limit is going to hopefully keep the dictators of Rome honest. And to a large extent it does, until the 1st century BC, until about 100 years before Christ, when the Roman Republic begins to fall apart. You have the assassination of public officials like the tribunes, Gaius, and it's been a while since I've taught ancient history, the Gracchi, the two Gracchus brothers, Gaius and Tiberius Gracchus, I believe are their names. I know Tiberius is one of them. And these guys are killed by mobs of their political enemies, and nobody gets punished. Maybe a few guys in the mob get slapped, but the people who ordered the hits, the assassinations of these political officials, they get away with it. It's a bad sign. And that's followed by a guy named Gaius Marius saying the Roman Republic needs an army, there isn't an army in place, so I'm going to raise an army with my own money. Gaius Marius raises an army. That would be like Bill Gates building his own private aircraft carrier, or Mark Cuban having a tank division. It's not something that's a good sign. So now Gaius Marius has an army that he pays, that he equips. Who do you think they're loyal to? Are they loyal to the Senate and people of Rome? They're loyal to the guy who pays them. They're loyal to Gaius Marius. Marius makes himself consul for life. And then he's overthrown by another guy who has his own private army. Lucius Cornelius Sulla has an army of his own, and he makes himself dictator for life. So all of the restraints that a dictator would have for holding temporary power are gone now. Luckily, Sulla dies quickly of a wasting disease and doesn't stay in power too long. But this sets the tone for the fall of Rome's republic, as more and more generals buy their own armies loyal to their ambition, not to the Senate and people of Rome. And this is where Pompey and Crassus and Julius Caesar and Mark Antony and Octavian come from, and it's where the Roman Empire comes from, which is the death of freedom for Romans. So our founders looked at this, and they tried to come up with a system that had the wisdom of the Romans. Never give anyone too much power, and always balance every bit of power you give with a countervailing power of some other group. People who believe that government is a force of good get deeply frustrated with the American system and the American Constitution, because the system is designed to slow down change, and it's designed to make it very difficult to make radical improvements to life from a government standpoint, because our founders understood that a government that can give you everything is powerful enough to take everything. It's too much power. So we don't just have a single national government controlling everything. One government to rule them all, or one government to find them, one government to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. No. We have a divided government. Local, state, federal. And at the federal level, we have another divided government. Congressional or legislative, executive or presidential, and judicial or the courts. No one has total power. Even the president during a crisis has limits to his power. And this is a good thing from the standpoint of our founders. The suspicion that absolute power corrupts absolutely, that giving anyone too much power will turn them into a monster, is something that our founders learned well from Rome. It worked in Rome for about twice as long as the American Republic has been around, but it ultimately failed. And so our founders tried to build on what Romans gave. They trusted a single president, but they balanced his power very carefully with other branches of government at the federal level and other levels of government in the federal system. Thank you.